Hey there, this is John from Heroes and Legends. Welcome to This Week in Magic the Gathering, number 5. And as always, we are going to look at the big tournaments that occurred this weekend, see what the results were and how it shifted the metagame. And since there hasn't been a whole lot of other news this week, I wanted to go back and visit a topic that's been a pretty controversial one for many years in Magic the Gathering, and I see comments all the time on videos that are at least semi-related to this topic, and it's of course a huge debate on message boards and everywhere Magic the Gathering is discussed, and that's the reserve list. So I wanted to give you a history of the reserve list and basically give you the facts, and then at the end I'll let you know my opinion on it. But before that, let's jump into the tournament scene. So before we get into anything else, I just want to say congratulations to Matt Nass, Jacob Wilson, and Sam Party, who won Grand Prix Detroit. And no easy task. When you take a look at the top 4 bracket down here, it was actually some pretty amazing names. And those guys came out on top, but they had to take down a team of 3 Hall of Famers to get there, consisting of Ben Stark, Louis Scott Vargas, and Eric Froelich. Also, other huge names, as you can see here in the top 4. For those of you not familiar in this type of format, they actually draft twice, so instead of doing a top 8, they do a cut to a top 4. But watching the tournament this past weekend, there were some just close games, huge power level. The semifinal match between the Peach Garden Oath and the, I guess, classic Channel Fireball team was really incredible. If you get a chance to go back and watch that on YouTube, check it out. The match was crazy. So really awesome event, and congratulations to the 3 of them. So before we move on to Grand Prix London, which was standard, let's take a look at what Wizards considered the top 5 cards of Grand Prix Detroit. Number 5 was Blazing Hellhound. Number 4 was Separatist Void Mage. Number 3 was Active Treason. Number 2 was Sentinel of the Eternal Watch. And number 1 was Conclave Naturalist. So this is a limited format, but as you can see, it starts to almost cross over and blur the lines into a constructed format. Some of these cards were hot because they work together well as combos. For example, Active Treason and Blazing Hellhounds was an amazing combo. They actually saw quite a bit of happening over the weekend. All right, so let's move on to Grand Prix London. And first off, congratulations to Fabrizio Antario, who won the whole thing. So let's take a look at the top 8 quickly, just to give some acknowledgement to the players there. So very interesting deck lists this weekend. We'll take a look at them. You'll notice, first off, the metagame is definitely shifting to deal with some of the Insult, Artifact, Ornithopter shenanigans that have been going on. There also were no copies of the Mono-Red Aggro in the top 8. These are all decks that people were definitely prepared for this time around, and we're starting to see more of a shift into a new type of deck. So let's take a look at these deck lists, and we'll start off with the winning deck list, and it was very reminiscent of many of the deck lists here in the top 8, as you're going to see in just a second. But it's basically called Hangerback Abzan, or Abzan Hangerback Walker. And it's an Abzan deck that uses Hangerback Walker, is basically what it is. So you see more of a classic Abzan build. A few interesting Planeswalkers in this version with Sorin and Ajani, Mentor of Heroes. But then you get cards like Warden of the First Tree. You get your kind of normal sort of stuff like Fleecemane Lion, Den Protector, and Offensa makes it in here as well. You got your Siege Rhinos, of course, Tremoka's Command, Ultimate Prices. So it really looks like an Abzan strategy that we are used to seeing, but it's just using the Hangerback Walkers. Another big card that came out of the sideboard this weekend was Tragic Arrogance. This combos very well, of course, with Hangerback Walkers, allowing you to use that as one of your creatures that you sacrifice, but then getting the Thopter tokens from it. So let's move on to the next deck in the deck list, and surprise, surprise, looks pretty similar to the first one. Now, there are some differences. This one's not running a Johnny. Instead, you're seeing Wingmate Rock. So there are some differences, but for the most part, pretty much the same deck list. You see some Heroes Downfalls here, but you still see Anafenza, you see Fleecemane Lion, you got your 4 Hangerback Walkers, you look down and you get your Tragic Arrogances in your sideboard. So basically the same concept. Let's look at the third deck, and now this one is a little different. This one is actually Red-Green Dragons, But when I say a little different, it's kind of a classic deck. It's running the Thunderbreak Regent and Stormbreath Dragons. Stormbreath Dragon had a huge impact this weekend, and this is maybe kind of its swan song, but that was one of the things. I think Brad Nelson said early in day one that this was the card of the weekend, and it really was. People just slipped off their radars. The metagame shifted to take care of issues like the Insult Artifact deck and the aggro red, and this kind of skipped by and did a lot of work this weekend. So these green red dragons decks using Stormbreath Dragon did very well. And of course they have Thunderbreak Regent, another very powerful card, Crater's Claws. So there were a number of these in the field as well. Here's the fourth deck we'll quickly take a look at, and again, who do we see here? Stormbreath Dragon. So this is a little different. This is more of a Jeskai build. You get Roast, you get Mantis Riders, Goblin Rabble Masters, a very aggressive deck, but you also get some Jaces and Soulfire Grandmasters in there. So interesting build. I mean, it's running 4 Jaces. Other than that, very similar to some of the builds we saw in Jeskai early in the last standard format. Tragic Arrogance also shows up in this sideboard as well, which I thought was interesting. And then we get another Hangerback Abzan deck. So this one's a little more like the winning deck list that's playing a Johnny, but there it is again. So that's 3 right by my count. And then we do get a green-white Megamorph deck, which is very similar in a lot of ways to the Abzan Hangerback deck. Runs a lot of the same cards. A little bit different because it's focused a little more on Megamorph, and you see cards like Boon Satyr and Hidden Dragon Slayer that are a little different, but guess what? You still have a couple Hangerback Walkers in there, and it's doing some of the same things that deck's doing. And then, surprise, surprise, another Hangerback Walker deck. So these really just kind of ruled the top 8. And then finally, we had an Abzan Control deck. And this was just your more classic Abzan Control deck, just focusing on Courser's of Crucifix. Siege Rhino did run a couple Nieces, though, but you got your Den Protectors, Dragonlord Jamoka, Tassigur. So this was a little more kind of what you're kind of used to seeing from Abzan. So that's your top 8. Very interesting. A huge shift to the metagame, and you got to wonder what's going to happen now with the Hangerback Walker deck lists. Are these going to explode and really take over the scene, or will there be a strong sideboard plan against this deck? And if there is, how does that affect sideboarding against some of the other big, powerful threats out there, like the Mill deck we saw last week, and of course the Insult Artifact and Mono Red aggressive decks that we saw the weeks prior. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens in the metagame next week and going forward. So before we jump out of that, let's look at the top 5 cards that had the biggest impact at the Grand Prix for Standard. And the first one is Revoke Existence. This is a card that actually can stop Hangerback Walker by exiling it, so you don't get the bonus Thopters. Tragic Arrogance, of course, works well with Hangerback Walker, as we mentioned before. And Offenza, the foremost, who showed up in a lot of these Abzan Hangerback Walker builds, of course. Stormbreath Dragon, which did a ton of work having that protection from white, and the Monstrosity ability, as well as the haste, was just huge this weekend. And finally, Siege Rhino, which, yeah, it's Siege Rhino. So, don't know what else I can say about Siege Rhino that we haven't said before in the past. So, that's your tournament wrap-up for the weekend. Very interesting shift to the metagame. So, as promised, we're going to do it. Let's talk about the reserve list. So, I figured I'd first start by giving you a quick history of the reprint policy and the reserve list and kind of how we got there. So for someone who was lucky enough to play Magic very early on when it was first starting out, I got to see a lot of this stuff happen firsthand. And let me first explain. Alpha came out. Alpha was supposed to last for 6 months, but it was so popular that it sold out right away. Basically, whatever Wizards printed went out to stores and it was gone. So not a lot of people really got their hands on Alpha, which is why it's so valuable today, and the cards are so rare. So they tried to correct that and print Beta. They made a few corrections to some mistakes that were in the Alpha set, and they threw Beta out there thinking they'd have enough for, another 6 months or so. Again, at this point, stores were a little more in tune with how popular this product was. So a lot of stores did make limits as to how much product you could buy, where when Alpha came out, people could just go in and buy the store's entire inventory if they wanted to. The stores didn't realize what they had on their hands. So they were a little more careful with beta, but even so, if you didn't know the day it was showing up at a store and you got there early and lined up and waited for the store to open, you weren't getting any beta. It was extremely rare, and it was just a flash in the pan. It was gone. So Wizards moved on to Unlimited, and this was their attempt to try to get the game into players' hands for real this time. And it did a slightly better, but again, same thing. If you didn't know what day it was showing up at stores, get there early. There were some other kind of big box stores, I guess, at the time, like KB Toys and stuff, that would actually get Unlimited. But again, players were smart enough to check these out, buy out their inventory. At this point, there were people buying and holding on to sealed product. There were people buying extra product to sell or give to their friends so they have someone to play against, since they were into this game, but other people couldn't get their hands on product. It was crazy, and again, it was just gone. So at that point, Wizards knew they had a huge hit on their hands. Richard Garfield had to rush out an expansion, and they rushed out Arabian Nights. And Arabian Nights was created like, I think it was over the course of a week or two or something like that. He sat down and built this whole set, and they went ahead and started printing it and getting it out to people. Again, they couldn't keep up with the demand. Stores would get allocated. They would order, what they really felt they needed to order, and they would get maybe half or less than half of what they'd ordered. It was just very difficult, again, to get your hands on the product. Jump ahead to the next expansion, Antiquities. A little better, but same story. Players just couldn't get their hands on a lot of this product. And then Legends came out. A little better again. This one was maybe the first product that if you really dedicated yourself to checking out a lot of the stores and calling stores to see if they had product, you could probably get your hands on at least a few packs of Legends. Got a little better. Now, the next set to come out was Revised, and Revised started out kind of slow to get out to stores, but slowly got better and better, and by the end of the Revised life cycle, Wizards did a pretty good job, I think, of getting a lot of cards out there and satisfying that demand. Now, the fourth expansion, the Dark, also was pretty, I don't want to say easy to get your hands on, but again, if you were even a casual fan and you were checking out stores regularly, you could get your hands on a good amount of the Dark if you really wanted it. The Dark was the first expansion that you could actually walk into a store and just see it sitting on a shelf for maybe a couple days at a time before it sold out. Stores were still limiting how many packs they'd sell because they knew they were being allocated, and they knew they probably wouldn't get any more of that product in. So at that point, things got a little crazy. Fallen Empires was the next set to come out, and Wizards finally got the printing issues taken care of. They were finally able to fulfill all the orders, and they told stores, you're not going to be allocated this time. Whatever you order, you're going to get. But the stores didn't believe them. So a lot of stores were ordering double or maybe even more than what they felt they needed because they thought they'd be allocated down. So the bad news for those stores was they got everything they wanted. So that's why Fallen Empire was so overprinted. And, as far as power level goes, a lot of people say, well, it wasn't a very powerful set either. At the time, it was not a weak set. There was a lot of tribal elements that were pretty strong that you could put in decks. There were some cards that, by today's standards, probably aren't very good, but were actually pretty good when the card pool was a lot smaller back in the old days, and people didn't have 4 copies of all these great cards, or necessarily everyone had a copy of Power 9 or anything like that. So these cards were not horrible cards. They might not have been as powerful as some of the past sets, but they weren't bad. It was just the overproduction that really killed the set. I remember going out. That was the first Magic product that I was able to afford a booster box of, actually, because you could get them for MSRP, where that never really happened before. You can even still get Fallen Empire booster boxes today for $100, $150. So Wizards kind of stopped and paused now that they were able to get product out there to people. They looked back at the first 4 expansions, Arabian Nights, Antiquities, Legends, and the Dark, and they felt that a lot of these cards were becoming inflated in price. Wizards didn't feel like they were too powerful, like some of the cards from the original Alpha Beta Unlimited. They didn't really want to put more Power 9 out there. By that point, they had realized that those were broken cards. But they did want to get cards out there to players that were from those expansions that were just more fun to play with. Now, I remember this time very vividly. I was one of those players that I had copies of cards. At that point, I think I had a couple Moxes. I had some of the cards from Legends. Maybe I had one or two like Hell's Caretakers, cards like that that you're building decks with, you're having a lot of fun with, but you kind of would like to have more. You'd like to have a play set, right? So I was very excited to hear Chronicles was coming out and that I'd get a chance to get more copies or even my first copies of some of these cards that I couldn't get from the first 4 expansions. I first realized that there was something kind of weird going on about it, though, when my local game store owner, who I knew very well, was terrified of this product because of his secondary market sales for his singles. He got a list from Wizards of the cards that were going to be printed in Chronicles, and he wouldn't tell anybody what was in that list. He kept it a secret because he knew that the market was going to crash. And these were the days before the internet and spoilers were big, and players didn't know what was going to be in the sets, and you didn't know what rarity level because that wasn't something that they publicly acknowledged right away, at least at that time. So now that this list was out, his employees, though, were a little more free with the information, and they started sharing it with some of the people that came to the store regularly. So all of a sudden, people started to think about, for the first time, wow, maybe I need to sell some of my cards because they could go down in value when these get reprinted. And all of a sudden, that game of the MTG market actually started to, for the first time, rear its head, and it became a very interesting time period where people all of a sudden started to panic, started selling cards, started speculating on cards that maybe wouldn't be in the set and buying those, things like that. So Chronicles finally hits, and much like Fallen Empire, it was not allocated, and stores thought that they needed to get more copies. They still hadn't completely learned their lesson from Fallen Empires, and orders also took place well in advance, so a lot of stores probably put their orders in before Fallen Empires actually shipped. So again, Chronicles got overproduced and it got sent out there. This was also during a time period, and it really started, I think, with Unlimited, but other stores aside from LGS's and like comic book stores started getting the product. So you started seeing it in stores like Electronics Boutique. I remember Electronics Boutique had tons of Chronicles that they were selling. You started seeing KB Toys would sell it, I believe. Stores like that would get their hands on Magic product. So the market kind of got flooded with these cards, and cards went from being $50 cards down to being $2-3 cards almost overnight. All of a sudden, there was a new group of people that showed up to the scene, and those were the collectors. And up until this point, we heard a lot about the players being excited about Chronicles, and wow, this is a chance for me to play with these cards. But the collectors all of a sudden showed up saying, you just destroyed the value of all my cards in my collection, and that's not cool. These were the people that were, standing out front of the stores waiting for product to show up back in the early days because they knew that this was rare and they had something good on their hands. Some of them played the game, some didn't. But they were basically at the point where their confidence was completely shaken in Magic. Why would I buy this product when at any time they can just reprint any of these cards and they won't hold any value? So Wizards felt that they needed to respond, and they kind of, I think, came out with almost a, knee-jerk response to start trying to make promises to players, well, to collectors, I should say, that they're not going to willy-nilly reprint cards, that they're going to hold a certain percentage of cards so that every set will have things that will remain special about them. So you can buy packs of cards in confidence. And even though not every card we're going to promise won't be reprinted, some percentage of each set won't be reprinted. When they chose initially what wouldn't be reprinted, they basically took rares. And they took some uncommons from the original set, Alpha Beta Revised. Back in 2002, they did change their policy, and we'll look at this article real quick. Basically saying they've re-examined some things, and those uncommons and commons from Alpha, Beta, and Unlimited were basically removed off the list. So I remember the biggest thing around that time was Clone was on the list, and it was removed, and it allowed them to reprint it in Onslaught. So things like that. Most collectors weren't too upset about that because at that time, uncommons and commons from those original sets weren't really worth all that much. They were okay with those leaving the list. So, having said that, let's look at the list quickly, and you're going to see, of course, tons of cards from the original 3 sets. And some of the standouts, of course, are the Power 9. The original dual lands, and then you have some other powerful cards here like Illusionary Mask. You got some dexterity cards like Chaos Orb, which they've kind of gotten away from. Of course, anti-cards like Contract from Below. Then there's some cards that are still powerful, but maybe wouldn't break the game, like Copy Artifact. And then you see some cards that are really probably just there for flavor, like Demonic Chords. Just because it kind of captures the flavor of the set. So that's what they were setting out to do. They didn't want to reprint broken cards, so those were easy no-brainers to put on the list. They didn't want to reprint cards that were maybe on the cusp of being broken. In some ways, a lot of people look at your dual lands like that. But they also looked at putting some cards they considered iconic, like, say, Rock of Care Ridges, stuff like that on the list as well. So there's your limited edition cards. Here's your Arabian Nights cards. And again, you got powerful things like Library of Alexandria. And then you have more, maybe less powerful, but iconic cards like Ali from Cairo. Stuff like that shows up. Also, too, at the time, cards seemed more powerful than they do today. So at the time when they put them on the list, they could have been very powerful cards. But as time went on, you look back and they're not really that good anymore. So then you got, of course, your antiquities. And of course, I'll leave a link in the description if you want to take a closer look at the list. Legends started coming out. You got things like the Abyss, a very powerful card. But then you have things like Cleanse, which is basically just a color hoser. Very interesting. Quite a few cards from Legends. Then you have the Dark. Fallen Empires, even though it was printed like crazy, they still wanted to make sure that players had trust in it. You got cards like Hand of Justice, which are very iconic. River Merfolk, Rainbow Veil. Rainbow Veil actually might be almost sort of playable. Ice Age. Then, of course, Homelands, another set that was very overproduced and not very popular or very powerful. You have Alliances. You have Mirage. Visions. Weatherlight. Tempest. Stronghold. And you notice once we got into this era, they started holding back less cards. Stronghold actually only has like 7 cards or so that they put on the reserve list. As at this point, I think Wizards was really not necessarily excited or happy with having a lot of cards on the reserve list that can be reprinted, so they started to take the numbers down a little bit. You got Urza's Saga, Urza's Legacy, and then finally Urza's Destiny. A lot of the Urza cards, there were a ton of broken cards there. So the numbers went up a little bit with that block, especially for a small set like Urza's Destiny. But that was a lot of it because there were some broken cards in there, and they just felt like we're not going to reprint these anyway. After Urza's Destiny, they kind of said, you know what? From this point forward, it's free game. We can reprint whatever we want, whenever we want. So know that as a collector when you buy our product that it could be reprinted. And the reason for that was at that point there was a lot of outcry by players who were getting to the point where they couldn't afford to get some of these older cards that were now on this reserve list. And also you started to think about formats evolving and changing. As Standard evolves and changes, okay, but then you started to get a Legacy type format, and they wanted to support that format, and they knew if they kept restricting cards, it'd be very difficult for them to do that. Now, fast forward a number of years later to Modern. Modern's great because they have complete control over what they can reprint, although they really haven't quite found that formula yet. Or maybe they think they have. I don't know. So, one other side note to the reserve list. Originally, there was a clause that cards could be reprinted in foreign languages. They eventually changed that. And then finally, they also changed a rule where they could reprint cards as long as they were in a premium format. So dual decks from the vault, judges promos. There were actually a few situations where cards from the reserve list were reprinted in those products. For example, this was in 2010, Pyrexia Negator showed up in Pyrexia versus the Coalition. From the Vault, Relics had Karn, Silver Golem, Masticore, Memory Jar, and Mox Diamond. And there were Judges promos that year for Pyrexia and Dreadnought, Morphling, Thawing Glaciers, and Wheel of Fortune. So, unfortunately, collectors weren't super happy about that. So they did change their policy and basically in 2010 say, okay, these are the cards that are coming out this year, but after that, we're not going to do that anymore either. So truly, you can't even now reprint a Judge's promo of cards that are in the reserve list or put them in a From the Vault or anything like that. So not much has changed since 2010. Wizards of the Coast, I mean, there's been members of that community who have said they aren't big fans of the reserve list because it does restrict what they can do from a reprint perspective and to get cards into players' hands. They do have the freedom to reprint cards on Magic Online, so there's that avenue. But as far as paper Magic goes, the reserve list is a reserve list, and it's a promise they made, and they want to stick to it to keep that confidence in the collectors that buy their product. Now, since the reserve list basically stopped being functional after Urza's Destiny, it is kind of interesting because, who are you protecting? Are those people still buying Magic cards who were kind of collecting those cards back in the old days? I don't know, probably not, but there are some people that do feel like the reserve list is important and that it would hurt the Magic economy, and there are a lot of current players that went back and spent a lot of money on some of those cards that are on the reserve list, either maybe to play Vintage or just to collect it, and they're not going to be super happy if all of a sudden Wizards took away the reserve list and said we're going to reprint Moxes and whatever else they want to reprint. So those are the facts behind it. Now I just want to kind of give you, I guess, my opinion on it, and I'd love to hear your opinion in the comments below. Definitely tell me what you think, because this is probably one of the most controversial topics. Here's my thought. So I get the fact that Wizards of the Coast has made a promise to collectors. People have gone into secondary market and purchased cards like the Dual Lands or Ancestral Recall or whatever. Went in there knowing that there's a certain confidence I can buy these cards with, even if I'm spending hundreds of dollars on these cards, or in some cases thousands of dollars on these cards. I know that they're not going to be printed in the next standard set, and they're not going to end up everywhere, and the value I just put in is going to get lost. I think those original collectors who were angry with Chronicles, I think they're all gone. I think for the most part they've moved on to other things. But there are a ton of players that have since then collected Magic and have bought older Magic cards to put in their collection, whether they want to play with them or they want to collect them. So I understand where they're coming from with changing the rules feels a little icky, especially since so much time has passed. Now, from a player's perspective, I'm kind of the mindset to say, and me personally, I'm more of a player than a collector. I like to play the game. I feel like it's a game. And it's a trading card game, sure. There should be rarities, and there should be cards that are worth more than others or harder to get than others. That's the concept of a trading card game. I get it. But when you have cards that are worth $20,000, that gets a little crazy. And to be fair, obviously I'm referring to Black Lotus. I can buy an unlimited Black Lotus for $5,000. I don't have to spend $20,000, but $5,000 is still tons of money, and that's ridiculous for cardboard, right? But it would be nice to be able to play Vintage and be able to go out there and buy a Black Lotus as a player. And maybe I would be more comfortable spending $200 on it than $5,000. But here's the dilemma. Other than the fact that you would upset a lot of people who've sunk money into secondary market cards by repealing the list, the reserve list. Let's say Wizards decided, you know what, we want to support Legacy and Vintage. Let's get rid of this thing. And, collectors, sorry. People that invested money in the product after the fact, sorry. But first and foremost, we're a game. We want to give the players the best experience. We want to be able to have Vintage at Friday Night Magic occasionally. That's what a lot of players are calling out, that they want to be able to play. And look at Vintage Masters on Magic Online. Came out a little over a year ago, and it really sparked a big interest in Vintage, not only online but in paper, for people who could afford it anyway. So there is a appetite out there. There's a demand. There are players that want to play Vintage and want to play Legacy, but can't get into it because of the cost and the barrier of entry. Those formats would definitely thrive a lot more if cards were affordable. So let's say they do it. Let's say they get rid of this thing. How do you go about reprinting these cards? So how do you do it? Because look at Modern. Modern is just cards from the last 12 years, and Wizards can't get that right. Let's face it. There's cards like Damnation that are creeping up, and Snapcaster Mage, and Liliana the Veil that are all creeping up closer and closer to the $100 mark. And these aren't old cards, and these are cards that were printed way more than any of these original alpha cards or what have you. So if you made a product like From the Vault, for example, and you put a foil Jace the Mind Sculptor in it, like they did a few years ago, stores raised the price. The suggested retail price at the time, I believe, was $34.99 for that product, and people were probably paying about $120 for From the Vault, mostly because they had a Jace the Mind Sculptor in it. That's Jace the Mind Sculptor. What are you going to do to get Black Lotuses or Power 9 out to people? How do you do that? Any product you make, because you don't know, it's special. You don't necessarily want to flood the market with these things, so you want to put it in maybe a From the Vault or some sort of special release. But I'm going to tell you right now, if Modern Masters cost $10 a pack, if you try to create a paper Vintage Masters and put reprints of Power 9 at a special rarity level in there, and have foil copies as well show up occasionally, you know what that product is going to cost? First off, what do you even make the MSRP for a pack of that stuff? Secondly, there's no way that's going to be sold anywhere near the MSRP. Distributors are going to just price gouge those prices to the stores. The stores are going to have to raise their prices to make money. And store owners are also going to take this as an opportunity to know that, hey, this is a limited product. This is my chance to make some money, and and I'm sure it would be allocated, and it would go out based on the participation level of Wizards Play Network and stuff like that. So stores kind of take that as a green light to increase prices sometimes, because this is kind of their opportunity to make some real money off of a product. And you can't fault them for that. So how do you get this stuff out here without it being just price gouged unbelievably? And I guess you could say, well, if I have to spend $100 a pack for Vintage Masters and I have a chance of getting a Black Lotus, it's better than going out and buying one for $5,000, which, who knows, could be counterfeit or what have you. That's true, maybe. But, what would happen? As far as secondary market value goes, I also am a firm believer that some of these older cards, they would lose some value, but they're not going to lose all their value. Rarity is still rarity. If something's rare, it's valuable. An Alpha Black Lotus is a lot more expensive than an Unlimited Black Lotus because it's much rarer. If I put a Black Lotus in Battle for Zendikar, it's going to be worth a lot less than any of the previous three, because, let's face it, it's not going to be nearly as rare. So I don't think reprinting some of these cards would necessarily crumble the secondary market. It would take a hit. Prices would go down, values would go down. But at the same time, look at the Modern Masters effect of prices go down for a little while, but people get their hands on cards and they develop an interest in Modern, and it spikes the rest of the cards. And in fact, it even spikes the cards that got reprinted. That would definitely happen as well to the Vintage and Legacy secondary market if they reprinted it. So it wouldn't just be an answer that would necessarily just say, hey, all right, now everyone can afford Vintage and Legacy. It just wouldn't be the case. So the other option is you just mass produce these things. You either work them in a standard set, maybe one standard rotation at a time, put a Mox in there, or you do something crazy like create some product that just goes out to LGSs, goes out to big box stores, just goes out to everywhere that has these cards in it, and you just print it and print it and print it and print it. Yeah, that would hurt the secondary market more. Players would, though, be able to get their hands on the cards, but would that completely shake the confidence in investors and in collectors? Yeah, it probably would hurt that confidence quite a bit. And do you want to alienate those customers? Also, it also takes away a little bit of the mystique and magic of the game, because Black Lotus is, this unattainable thing that is just, probably most people haven't even seen one in person, and if you all of a sudden just start printing those like water, does that take away a little bit of the legacy, a little bit of the lore, a little bit of the mystery of this game? Yeah, it might make it a little less exciting if every card was just available to everybody, very easily. So I don't have the answer. I'll be honest with you. As a player, I wish these cards were available so more players could play with them. But at the same time, I don't see a good way to do it without alienating a number of customers, alienating a second market, really hurting LGSs who are relying on making money off the secondary market, or going the route of the limited product, which really doesn't help players that much anyway, because the product's just going to be too limited and too expensive to get after the fact, and it almost becomes just a slap in the face. So I don't have the answer, and I don't know what Wizards can do about this other than what they've done, and it's basically nothing, and created a new format, Modern, to have an eternal format that they do have control over. And it's kind of sad, that these cards will never be reprinted. I do think that, and I've kind of speculated on this before, I always said if one day Magic ever ends, if something's going to happen to cause this game to bottom out, it's going to be pressure from Hasbro to make more money. And, maybe Wizards has a downturn, they lose some money, corporate Hasbro says, hey, you got to be making the profit they used to make and then some. We have shareholders we're thinking about. Do something, make money now. Their answer could be to take away the reserve list and print these cards, and I think that could be devastating to the game. I really do. So I don't have the answer. I wish that players could play with these cards, but I just don't know how to get them into players' hands in a way that makes any sense at this point. So, maybe Wizards just needs to focus on making Modern reprints more accessible and making Modern more accessible and taking down the huge barrier to enter Modern with things like Zendikar fetch lands. And they basically are doing the right things there, but they're just not doing them fast enough. Cards are going up in price too quickly, and by the time a Modern Masters comes out, it's too late and it's too limited to really make much of a difference. And maybe that's okay, from a collector's point of view, but if you want Modern to not go the way of Legacy and Vintage, which is still played, they're not dead formats by any means, but there's not a ton of people playing them. I mean, let's be honest. But Modern will dwindle and dwindle and dwindle if they don't find a way to fix it. And I guess that's probably the moral of the story that you can learn from this whole situation is maybe Vintage and Legacy reprints and getting those cards in a player's hands, maybe that ship sailed, but don't let it sail on Modern. Keep up with the cards, keep up with the reprints, keep up with the prices so that players can get these things in their hands. So Anyway, I guess that's my opinion. Let me know your thoughts. And having said that, that's this week in Magic. It's our 5th episode. And last thing I just want to mention real quick is we do have our Patreon page, so please check it out. I definitely would like to get some more or some better equipment to really do these videos for you and be able to do some more interesting visual stuff, especially. So please check that out. And we have some awesome patron exclusive giveaways when we hit certain tiers, including a box of standard cards. So, hey, as always, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and have a great day. Hey, thanks as always for watching. These videos are made possible by viewers just like you through Patreon. Please check out our Patreon page by clicking on the top right. Down below, we have more links to quality Magic the Gathering content, and if you're interested in seeing trading cards open that aren't Magic the Gathering, check out the link to our trading card channel, Heroes and Legends Trading Cards. Thanks, and have a great day.